Hello, hello. It's great to see so many people here joining. Do put your name in the chat and where you're listening from. It'll be nice to know. We will be recording this session, and the recording will be available after the session, and we'll send it in the email as well. Throughout the session, please drop your comments and your questions in the chat function, and we'll get to them after the presentation. So we're just going to start. So I'm Rachel Hamado. So I've been working with autistic children and young adults since 2016. I've worked in both primary and secondary schools. I'm a board certified behavior analyst as well. And I joined the Beyond Autism Outreach team this year.
Hi everyone, my name is Matt Wicks. I've been working with autistic children and adults since 2008. I've worked in schools and on home programs, also a board certified behavior analyst, and I've been working with Beyond Autism for about 5 years now.
So today we will be speaking about EBSA, emotionally based school absences, in this webinar. We'll be looking at statistics, we'll be looking at the impact of the pandemic, we'll also look at some assessments and interventions, and we'll discuss a case study as well at the end. So what is EBSA? So it's been called many things, which includes school refusal and persistent absences. It's simply when a child is unable to go to school due to emotional or well-being factors. They're either too stressed by the school environment or their confidence and self-esteem have been impacted. We try to avoid using words such as refusal, or as this implies that the child has control over the situation and the issue is with them rather than with the context. It's not a diagnosis, it's simply a description of behaviors that results in a range of different factors. There are many causes, they're not always clear, especially when to start off with, but what we do know is once avoidance starts, there is often a downward spiral of missing out, which leads to additional anxiety and makes it harder to get back in. And whatever the reasons are, the results are always the same. The child is stuck at home and not accessing education. So this is a quote from an article in 2008. It says, school refusal occurs when stress exceeds support, when risks are greater than resilience, and when pull factors that promote school non-attendance overcome the push factors that encourage attendance. So let's look at some stats. So we're going to look at some stats which compare absences rate for pupils in England from 2016-2017 academic year compared to the 2021-2022 academic year. So as you can see, there was already a gap between pupils with an AHCP and pupils with no SEND support, with 82% having absences with students with EHCPs and only 4.1% with no support. But as you can see in 2021, the gap widened. So already, even though the gap is still there, it is a much bigger gap, and that is a concern to all of us. So the statistics back up what we all are thinking. There is a long-term impact of the pandemic. The Ofsted report shows that the levels are not returning to pre-pandemic levels, which is concerning. Learners who are supported with an EHCP plan or a SEND support are missing at least 10% of their sessions at school in autumn 2021. And this is substantially higher than the pre-pandemic levels as we saw before. So let's talk a bit more about the COVID impact. So stats have shown us that there is an impact of the pandemic, and it's still being felt, as it's still being felt in different sectors as well as we live through it. The population who are vulnerable are being impacted a bit more than others. Many pupils are being at home, and they found it more easy to stay at home than going into school. The if you think about the quiet environments at home, they're not being met with the stresses of school and all the other factors that may affect them. At home, for them, it's more relaxed, it's more peaceful for them. Conversely, if you think about when we were in our bubbles, there was smaller class sizes, then transitions around school as well were quieter. So when we come back after the pandemic, going back to school, or we're already met with the larger class sizes, the noise levels are much higher as well. Children with that, and it's very important that we look at individualized support, and difficulties can arise across various difficulties can arise across the population. We want to make sure that we provide support for that child and what works well with that child. So let's talk about the general impact of EBSA. So in the short term, we can see academic problems arising. So missing teaching, downward spiral of missing out, and not being able to catch up. You can understand the anxiety of going into class. And if you've missed a lesson or you've missed a couple of lessons and they've already moved on, you already feel like, okay, I don't understand what's going on. They become overwhelmed. It's very hard for them to catch up. There's also financial difficulties. So parents are having to stay at home to look after their child who is missing out on education. This can impact employment as well. And in terms of long-term effects, we're looking at limited social and employment opportunities. So this can lead to future economic hardship for both parents and children. They're not able to socialize as they would in school. And also because they're missing out on education, their employment opportunities become more limited. There's also a lack of career choice or problem planning skills. And there's also problems maintaining a work routine because they're out of school, they're out of routine. The school routines sometimes can help understand work routines. And because you're out of that, it can often lead to problems around routines in general. Adult mental health issues, anxiety about missing out, anxiety about not feeling like you're up to par with your peers, anxiety about social situations, and heightened social difficulties as well. So social isolation, because you're more at home, there's less social opportunities, less social interactions. So you're more likely to want to stay at home, stay in your little bubble. And when you go out into other social situations where you do have to interact, it can be quite hard for you to initiate social interactions as well.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So let's look at the solutions, have a think about what's already out there. The majority of local authorities have guidance on EBSA. If you look at their websites, it tends to be around good practice, not necessarily specific interventions. There's the assess, plan, do, and review model, which again is like good practice in SEND schools. One of the things that makes it hard for EBSA especially is that identifying it, and especially early on, when you might just have the odd one or 2 days off, and it's only when it really becomes full-blown not able to come into school that, like, okay, now we've got an issue. But actually, early on, if we've been able to identify it, then it might have been easier. It can be really hard as well for schools to support a child in the home. There's often a lack of resources, being able to have staff that can access the home. And then if you think about that, trying to support a behaviour in only one environment, when obviously the young person is not able to get into school, there's only so much that can be done. So that can be really tricky. And also there's a lot of punishment-based strategies in place. There are fines for parents, potentially going to court, and all of those really kind of punitive things in place on parents who are struggling themselves to support their young person. It can just lead to further breakdowns in the relationship between school and home, and ultimately is not a helpful solution. So what do we think is helpful? Person-centered approaches. We're always looking at what's person-centered. This is where we start. So a PCP, or a person-centered plan, is not an assessment. It's something that we call a working document. So we're constantly adding to it. When new information comes to light, we can update it. It should always respect the way an individual communicates. If it needs to be in easy read format for them, using simplified language so they can understand, because it's a plan for the individual and it's about them. The main focus of that PCP is these two areas here, what's important for the individual. So that's what kind of things need to be put in place, what additional supports, what kind of things we need to do to support their communication, who needs to be helping them. But then also what's important to them. So it's not about, as professionals and other people, just saying what a young person needs. Obviously that's going to be important, but it's also asking them what they need, or identifying what is important to them, what are their interests, what are their values, what do they want to achieve in the future. So those are the two main areas of a PCP that we're going to be looking at. The main idea of that PCP is keeping the individual at the heart of any of those decisions that are made and not ignoring them. Also identify key people. So who are those people in place that are going to keep this intervention going long term? Who are the people that are going to be supporting the young person? So by having those people named and identified, we know who's going to be helping. So this slide just shows some kind of an example of what a PCP might look like, a template. So there's lots of different boxes you can fill in all the information, the key information about the young person. You might be linking other additional documents, behaviour plans, IEPs. And then there's also a space there for like a circles of intimacy kind of diagram. So you've got the individual in the middle, and then increasing circles with maybe around the middle it's family, close friends. Outside of that, you've got school staff, you've got psychologists, and then outside of that, potentially the wider community that might be supporting. So that's kind of an example of what that might look like. Okay, so in terms of then doing an assessment, like we said, the PCP itself is an assessment, but then as behaviour analysts, like myself and Rachel are, we would come in, we'd support, and we'd start off by conducting a functional behaviour assessment, an FBA. The FBA consists of both direct and indirect measures of behaviour. So we might be doing interviews with the young person themselves if they're able to take part in that. Teachers, school staff, caregivers. We're also going to be reviewing or setting up systems to monitor behaviour, looking at behaviour data across a certain amount of time. There are some specific EBSA assessments as well. So Kearney created the school refusal assessment scale, and that's something that can be completed again with the young person if they're able to answer those sorts of questions, or with caregivers, school staff. In this assessment process, we're trying to build up a timeline of kind of key points in the pupil's life, from home as well as school. And all this information gathering comes together and helps us to identify, hypothesize what the function of the behavior is. So the behavior being the school avoidance, but the function, the reason why, that's what we need to know. And that's what Rachel's going to now move on to tell you about.
Thank you, Matt. So like Matt said, when we're looking at interventions, we want to make it function-based. We want to look at the context and we want to say why. Why is this happening? Why doesn't this child want to go to school? What's happening? So we want to identify functions that are leading the behavior of staying at home. So we're going to talk about the 4 different functions. So we have the first one, which is avoiding school-related stimuli that provoke negative affectivity. So avoiding things that the child might find hard. So they might be avoiding schoolwork. Maybe the work is too hard. Maybe it's not challenging enough. Maybe they're just a bit bored with school. Maybe they're avoiding the noisy situations or stimuli that is negative to them as well. Or maybe they're trying to escape from an aversive situation. So maybe they have a hard test that's coming up, or maybe they're escaping exams, or they don't want to do their exams. They're finding something really hard, or they're escaping the noise or a particular lesson. Another one function that we might cause EBSA is attention. So being at home, you're getting one-on-one attention with your parents, you're getting attention from all those at home, from the pets all the time, whereas at school, it's quite hard for teachers to give that much one-to-one attention as they have to share amongst all the kids. So they're not getting as much attention at school as they are at home. Another thing to look out for is having access to tangible rewards out of school. So they have things that they have their preferred things at home. They are able to watch TV the whole day or play games or be on the computer or some video games. They have, the kitchen is close by. They can get their favorite snacks and their favorite foods whenever they want. Whereas at school, there is a school routine. Don't have access to all those things as much. So again, that might be a reason why they're staying at home. So we want to make sure our intervention that we put in place is based on a function and an identified function that we've found out. So for example, if you look at the function of avoiding an aversive stimuli, let's say, for example, lights, maybe harsh lights. Maybe the lights are a bit too harsh in the school environment. So this is why what we have found out to be a reason as why EBSA is happening. So EBSA is negatively reinforced. So by taking away the harsh lights in school and being at home, the behavior of staying at home and not having the harsh lights is increasing. It's likely to increase because they're more comfortable at home, because in school, the aversive stimuli is there, and then the harsh lights are more there, where at home it's easier, they're more relaxed, they feel as well more relaxed as well, they're less anxious. So they're not going to school. So that behavior continues to increase because they are more relaxed at home. When they go to school, they are not relaxed. So it keeps on snowballing and the downward spiral happens at this point. And then the child just continues to avoid school because, again, school is aversive. The harsh lights are not going away and they feel very comfortable at home. So they'd rather stay at home where they are comfortable to be there. So let's look at the next slide. We will look at some data. So we want to look at data that's ABC data. So antecedent, we're talking about what's happening right before a behavior happens. Behavior, we're talking about the behaviors that we observe. And then consequence, what happens after the behavior happens. And what we're doing with this is we're looking at patterns to see if we can see any patterns happening, whether it's in antecedents or whether it's in the consequence or what happens just after the behavior, and see if we can kind of understand what the function is so we can make sure our intervention that we put in place is relevant. So we'll just go through it quickly. So on Monday, the pupil's feeling very overwhelmed with the noise and the reception and at the start of the day. So they start crying and they're withdrawn for the whole morning. They're unable to attend math and phonics lessons. On Wednesday, a group of children start running towards them in the corridor. As you can imagine, it could possibly be quite noisy and startling. The pupil runs away from the group and hides in the receptionist's office. And they end up staying there for about half an hour and they don't go to math. So on Thursday, they wake up complaining of a stomachache. They stay at home for the whole day and they avoid the noise, they avoid the crowds, and they have a relaxed day at home. So we want to show how it snowballs. So how it starts with a small incident where they're just missing a math or phonics lesson. And then on Wednesday, they're missing half an hour of the lesson. They're going into the receptionist's office. And then on Thursday, they stay at home. So although it starts really small, we can see from just a week how it's turned into wanting to just stay at home. We have to think about additional factors as well. Are they having difficulties in classes? Are they having issues with home environments? Is there something wrong with their sibling? Is their sibling upset? So it's not always one particular function, but just from what we can observe and see from this ABC data sheet, we can see that the function might be avoiding the noise. So then once we put this in place, we can put different interventions in place after that. Another way we want to go at it is make sure we're working collaboratively with everyone. So if school is only working on EBSA, there will be no progress. And it's the same for the other way. If home is only working on EBSA, there will be no progress. We have to make sure we're working together to make sure everyone's on the same page. there's more people who can come into this. It's not just home and school. We can get support from the home support team. We can get support from speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, and outreach services like Beyond Autism. We can bridge those gaps where between home and school to help sure everyone's working together and on the same page. And communication is key. Everyone should have clear communication between each other, between all the services and all the professionals involved, especially making sure that the individual is at the key of every decision that we make. It's not about parents. It's not about what school wants or what parent wants or what these professional wants. We have to make sure that the individual's wants and needs are at the heart of every decision that we make. And as I mentioned before, organizations like outreach organizations such as Beyond Autism, we make sure that we bridge the gap between home and school. It's not always easy to make sure a big team works together coherently. So outreach services can make sure we're all on one page, we're all sharing information that's pertinent for the case. We also have to be flexible. So the focus is always on the individual in the context. But however, sometimes things change, sometimes circumstances change, and functions as well can change. So we have to make sure that we are flexible and we're changing with whatever the situation presents. Sometimes individuals might behave differently at home and behave differently in school. So sometimes school can't help with home and home can't help with school because they're not seeing the same behaviors. So we can't just say because it's not happening in school, it's not our problem. We have to make sure we're all working together and we be flexible. Sometimes the interventions that we put in place will need to change. So something can be working great for a week and the next week it's not working. We don't just stick to it. We try and see why is it not working anymore, and we make necessary changes. It might be small, tiny changes, or it might be big changes that we have to do. But again, be flexible. And if possible and where possible, make sure we're making reasonable adjustments in the school environment for pupils, making sure everyone does the best to make sure that the situation and the school environment is optimal for that pupil, and making sure all the other pupils are, not being affected too much. But again, making sure it's a comfortable environment, because all our autistic individuals, they all have different sensory needs, and we all have to respect that and understand that and try and make those reasonable adjustments where possible. We also have to look at teaching skills, because when an individual is out of school, they are missing some gaps, and we want to identify those gaps and start teaching those skills as well. So we want to look at techniques to identify what's when things are getting difficult and how to regulate. So how they can regulate themselves and regulate their situation and environment to help them go through those difficulties. We want to look at methods to de-escalate and self-regulate, such as movement breaks, taking themselves to a calm space, taking themselves to a sensory room, or using some fidget toys to help them self-regulate. We're looking at social skill groups. We're looking at working on new skills to help them socialize with peers, to help them initiate new social interactions as well, and navigate difficult social situations. And we also have to work on gradual exposure. So systematically getting them used to the aversive stimuli that they're having difficulties with. Because we can only manipulate or make reasonable adjustments so much in our little home and our school, but we want these individuals to be able to go into the wider community. So although we are making adjustments for them in home and school, in supermarkets and other places that they may visit, we don't want that to be a barrier for them. So we want to systematically expose them and get them used to those aversive environments, such as like a noisy environment or harsh lighting, so that they can experience other things. And lastly, communication. We want to work on communication. We want to make sure that the autistic individuals have a way to communicate when they are feeling uncomfortable, when they're feeling overwhelmed, when they're not happy with what's happening in the situation, using escape mans, using words that they can say, I need a break, I need help, give me space, or I need to go to my calm space. And this will help them communicate not just with people in their close circle and their inner circle, but with the wider community, with everyone around them. So they're functionally able to communicate what they want, when they want, and why they want it.
Thanks, Rachel. So yeah, we're just going to finish up with a case study. So this was one of our colleagues was working with a teenage girl at an SEMH, that's a social, emotional, mental health school. So if we look at those things we've discussed in the webinar so far, starting with that assessment phase, conducting the functional behaviour assessment. For this young girl, it was identified that the primary function was found to be that kind of escape or avoidance from sensory overload, so becoming overloaded, and especially around social situations. She also felt like she didn't really have much autonomy. She needed like a safe space to be able to regulate and feel safe in school. So the intervention that was put in place, starting off with some values work through something called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. Then a really simple break card, a green card that she had that meant that if she needed a break, she could use that as a way to ask for a break. But then built into that, a lot of work was done on helping her to recognize those triggers, to see when it was coming, rather than getting to the point of being too overwhelmed and then not wanting to be there. How can you see it starting and then take that break early so you can get back to a sort of baseline? A lot of that work was done around helping her to recognize body sensations as she was starting to feel anxious. Maybe her heart rate was increasing, sweaty palms, those kind of things. Also, it's really important to have a dedicated space for those breaks. So it's great to teach someone to be able to ask for a break, but if there's nowhere then to take that break, it's not going to be effective. So she needed that space that was dedicated for that. So she knew that when she asked for a break, she got what she needed. There was also a self-monitoring system built into this to help her, again, giving her that autonomy. You know, she's a teenage girl. She didn't necessarily need everyone telling her what to do and what not to do, but to give her that ownership over the system. And then also when she was taking those breaks, what was she doing to get herself back, or with the support of other people, get back down to a baseline so she was then able to access school again, be ready to learn later on. So there's a lot of different things being done, but actually some quite simple solutions, some reasonable adjustments that the school were able to make to give her that space, to have that understanding that this is what she needs. And the outcome was really positive. There was an increased access to school and mainly that reduction in anxiety. And that's what we want. None of our young people are going to be able to access school if they're not in a place to be able to learn, if they're feeling anxious, and especially if they're not in school. So if we can do these things to help them get back to that baseline and then be able to learn, then that's also what we want to do. So in summary, what have we covered? We've looked at what EBSA is and also what it isn't. We know that the statistics show some real concerning things, like the rates are not returning to pre-pandemic levels. So it's not something we can just blame on the pandemic. We've also looked at the fact that we need a thorough person-centered assessment to identify the functions of the behavior, which will in turn lead to a function-based intervention. Hopefully also supporting that return to school. And finally, that we need collaborative and flexible working between home and school. That's that key. Okay, thanks so much for listening, everyone. We've got a bit of time for questions. We do have a lot of questions, so we'll be able to get back to people afterwards. We will follow up with the questions because there's a lot and we don't want anyone to miss out. But there was one I noticed that I'd like to answer. So Emma Tolley saying that, in summary, basically whenever her daughter would then kind of get back into school, the school wanted to then push it for more. So as soon as there was some success, it was then like, let's push a bit further, or potentially putting her off by mentioning exams as soon as she was back. And I think that's really key. We see that quite a bit coming up. And like we said earlier on, for schools, it's like that needed to be flexible, but also really understanding like what the issue is. So when something's working, that's great, but let's keep it going for a bit longer rather than always hoping we can just jump straight back into, you know, full time doing everything as it was before. Because each time that then it breaks down again, it can then be that much harder to kind of get back to where we were before. And I can see how that can be really frustrating for you as a parent. You know, you think, okay, we've got that, we've done all the work at home, and it's not easy coming in. But then as soon as you're in, then everything breaks down again. So it really needs that work from both sides and everyone being on the same page. And yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Is there anything you saw, Rachel, that
I saw some there was one that I spoke about, like I think Banham Caroline mentioned her child wouldn't use break cards or take breaks. There were some also a couple of around that, and how it does take confidence to use those cards, and some of the pupils don't want to be different or look different in classes when they're using that, and that's absolutely right. These are all different examples, but again, we want to make sure that the individuals at the key of the intervention we put in place. If they're uncomfortable with that or they're unable to use it, you wouldn't introduce those cards. You look at something else. Maybe it's a wristband, maybe it's a colored wristband that they can just secretly put on their wrist, that the teacher only knows what that means, that tells them that they can have that break. So it might take away that anxiety about looking different or feeling overwhelmed about that. It could be just structured breaks, so they know every 10 minutes they're going for a break, and the teacher would know that as well, where they don't have to ask for it, and they don't have to look different. They can also be given the option of the break, and it's up to them to decide whether they're taking it or not. It's not compulsory for them. So it's individualized, it's bespoke, it's what is best for that individual only. And it's not a one thing fits all. We're going to make sure it works for that people for the long term. And as we said, it's flexible. It will change if the people changes as well.
Great. Okay, everyone. Like I said, we will follow up with answering the individual questions that have been asked. We just want to let you know that there will be links sent out with the a feedback form, a link to donate if that's something you can do. Also, the recording of today's webinar will be available. Please fill out the feedback form if you can. It's really helpful for us. The next session we have is Friday, 16th of June. That's going to be with our colleague Carrie Caceres-Tagron. She is talking about preparing autistic learners for the summer holidays. All that's left for me and Rachel to say is thank you so much. And we'll see you next month, hopefully.
Bye-bye.